My late wife's sister showed up at the ranch in morning black. The widow next door wasn't happy about it. The dust kicked up by her black carriage settled like a shroud over the weathered fence posts of the double-bar ranch. I watched from the porch, my coffee growing cold in my calloused hands, as the driver helped a woman in mourning dress step down onto the hard-packed earth. Even from a distance, I could see the familiar tilt of her chin, the way she held her shoulders, proud, defiant, just like Martha used to. Elizabeth Caldwell had come calling, and trouble always followed in her wake like shadows at sunset. It had been 3 months since I'd buried my Martha beneath the cottonwood grove, 3 months since the fever took her despite all Doc Henderson's medicines and prayer, 3 months of learning to cook beans that didn't taste like leather, of mending shirts with stitches that looked like barbed wire, and of sleeping alone in a bed that felt vast as the Texas plains. Jack Morrison, Elizabeth's voice carried across the yard, crisp as autumn air. She approached with measured steps, her black skirts rustling against the wooden steps as she climbed to the porch. Up close, the resemblance to Martha was striking. The same cornflower blue eyes, the same stubborn jawline, but where Martha had been warm sunlight, Elizabeth was cool moonbeams. Elizabeth. I set down my cup and stood, removing my hat out of respect for her mourning attire. Didn't expect to see you out this way. I received word about Martha. Her voice caught slightly on her sister's name. I came as soon as I could arrange passage from San Francisco. San Francisco. That explained the fine cut of her dress, the quality of her gloves, the way she held herself like she owned the ground she walked on. Martha had mentioned her sister's marriage to a wealthy merchant, how she'd moved west and rarely writ. Funeral was 3 months back, I said, not unkindly. Would have sent word if I'd known where to reach you. Something flickered in her eyes, pain, regret, or maybe just the dust from the trail. I know I'm too late to say goodbye properly, but I hoped I might stay for a while, to be close to where she lived, where she was happy. Before I could answer, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made us both turn. Sarah McKinnon rode up on her paint mare, her auburn hair catching the afternoon light like burnished copper. She'd been Martha's closest friend, and since the funeral she'd taken to checking on me with the persistence of a summer storm. Sarah's green eyes took in Elizabeth's mourning dress, the expensive carriage, the way the stranger stood on my porch like she belonged there. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Jack, she said, dismounting with the fluid grace of someone who'd been born in the saddle. Didn't know you were expecting company. Sarah McKinnon, meet Elizabeth Caldwell, I said, feeling tension thick as smoke between the two women. Martha's sister. Sarah's expression shifted, surprise replacing suspicion. Martha's sister, she never mentioned. She caught herself, but not before Elizabeth's chin lifted another notch. Martha and I weren't close in recent years, Elizabeth said, her voice steady as stone. Distance has a way of pulling families apart. Sometimes it's more than distance, Sarah replied, and though her tone was neutral, there was steel underneath. I cleared my throat, sensing undercurrents I didn't fully understand. Elizabeth's looking to stay for a spell. Thought she might take Martha's old room. The color drained from Sarah's face. Martha's room. Jack, are you sure it's what Martha would want? I said firmly, though truth was I wasn't sure of anything anymore. Her sister's welcome here as long as she needs. Elizabeth smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's very kind, Jack. I promise I won't be a burden. Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. I'm sure. She turned to me, her voice softer. Don't forget the Hendersons are expecting us for dinner Sunday. Martha promised we'd help with their barn raising. The reminder hit like a physical blow. Martha had been planning that dinner for weeks before she took sick, excited about showing off her apple preserves and catching up with old friends. Now Sarah was keeping those promises, keeping Martha's memory alive in ways I couldn't manage alone. Course, I managed, wouldn't miss it. After Sarah rode off, kicking up dust clouds that seemed to match her mood, Elizabeth and I stood in awkward silence. The afternoon sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. She seems protective of you, Elizabeth observed, watching Sarah's retreating figure. Sarah's good people, dinna helps. I trailed off, not wanting to voice the words that still cut deep. Since Martha died, Elizabeth's voice was gentle now, the edge gone. Jack, I want you to know how sorry I am. Martha wrote about you in her letters, about how happy you made her. I should have come to visit, should have met the man who won her heart. She wrote to you. Elizabeth nodded, reaching into her reticule to pull out a small bundle of letters, tied with blue ribbon, every few months right up until, she took a shaky breath. The last one came 2 weeks before I received the telegram about her passing. She was planning a garden, wanted to plant roses by the kitchen window. The roses, Martha had talked about those roses constantly, poring over seed catalogs, and planning where each bush would go. I'd promised to help her plant them come spring, but spring had come and gone without me touching a spade. Come on, I said gruffly, picking up her traveling bag. Let's get you settled. Martha's room was just as she'd left it, her hairbrush on the vanity, her Sunday dress hanging in the wardrobe, her Bible on the nightstand, with a pressed wildflower marking her place. I'd closed the door 3 months ago and hadn't opened it since. Elizabeth stood in the doorway, her hand pressed to her heart. Oh Martha, she whispered, I can put you in the guest room instead, I offered, suddenly understanding why Sarah had looked so stricken. No, Elizabeth's voice was firm. This is perfect, it's like she's still here. That evening Elizabeth insisted on cooking supper. I sat at the kitchen table, watching her move around Martha's domain with surprising familiarity. She found the good china without asking, knew which drawer held the silverware, seasoned the stew with the same herbs Martha favored. Martha taught me to cook, she explained, catching my stare. Before I married Charles, before I moved to the city, we spent a summer together when I was 16, learning to keep house. You were close then. Elizabeth's stirring slowed. Very close. Martha was 3 years older, but she never made me feel like a burden. When our parents died of the cholera, she could have sent me to our aunt in Boston. Instead she kept me with her, made sure I had a season, proper introductions. What changed? She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. Finally she set down the wooden spoon and turned to face me. Charles happened. My husband. Martha didn't approve of him, said he was too old, too controlling. We quarreled about it, said things we shouldn't have. After the wedding we barely spoke. Martha never mentioned any of this. She was protecting me, even after all these years. That was Martha, always putting others before herself. Elizabeth's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. Charles died 6 months ago, a heart attack. Martha's last letter came right after the funeral. She said I was welcome here any time, that the past didn't matter anymore. We ate in comfortable silence, the first peaceful meal I'd had since Martha's passing. Elizabeth had her sister's gift for making a house feel like a home, for filling empty spaces with warmth and quiet companionship. The next morning I woke to the smell of fresh coffee and bacon frying. Elizabeth was already dressed, and bustling around the kitchen, her black dress replaced by a practical gray work dress, with the sleeves rolled up. Morning, she said cheerfully. I thought I'd start on that garden Martha mentioned in her letters. The roses. My chest tight. Elizabeth, you don't need to. I want to. For Martha. She paused in her egg flipping to look at me seriously. And maybe for myself too. I need to do something with my hands. Something real. City life has a way of making you feel useless. After breakfast, we walked out to the spot Martha had chosen for her rose garden. The ground was hard-packed from the summer heat, stubborn as a mule. Elizabeth studied it with the same intensity Martha used to bring to her sewing. We'll need to break up this soil, she add some composted manure, maybe some of that black earth from near the creek. You know about gardening? Elizabeth smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. Charles kept a stable of prize-winning horses, but couldn't grow a weed if his life depended on it. I spent most of our marriage tending the gardens at our estate. It was the only place I could find peace. We worked side by side through the morning, breaking ground with pick and shovel. Elizabeth's hands might have been soft from city living, but she didn't shy away from the hard work. By midday we'd cleared a patch big enough for Martha's planned rose garden. Jack Morrison, what in heaven's name are you doing? Sarah's voice cut through the afternoon heat like a cold wind. She stood at the edge of the garden plot, her face flushed with anger and something deeper betrayal. "Starting Martha's rose garden," I said, leaning on my shovel handle, like she wanted. With her, Sarah's gaze fixed on Elizabeth, who straightened slowly, dirt streaking her gray dress. "Martha was my sister," Elizabeth said quietly. "I think she'd want me to help with her garden." "Your sister who you abandoned for 20 years, Sarah's voice rose. "Your sister who cried every Christmas because you never wrote, never visited. Your sister who died calling your name." The words hit Elizabeth like physical blows. She staggered backward, her face going white as fresh milk. "Sarah, that's enough," I said sharply. "Is it? Do you know why Martha never talked about her precious sister Elizabeth? Because it broke her heart every time. Because she spent years hoping for just one letter, one visit, any sign that her baby sister remembered she existed." "You don't understand," Elizabeth whispered. "Charles wouldn't let me, wouldn't let you." Sarah laughed bitterly. "Martha understood plenty about controlling husbands. Her first husband was cut from the same cloth as yours, I'd wager, but she still found ways to keep in touch with people who mattered to her." I stared at both women, pieces of a puzzle I'd never known existed clicking into place. Martha's first marriage before we met had been brief and she'd mentioned it only once, saying some men thought they owned their wives like cattle. "Martha was married before?" Elizabeth asked, her voice barely audible. "For 3 years," Sarah said, "to a man who isolated her from everyone who loved her, who controlled every penny, every letter, every moment of her day. When she finally found the courage to leave him, she swore she'd never let fear keep her from the people who mattered." Elizabeth sank down onto a nearby stump, her composure finally cracking. "She never told me. In her letters she seemed so happy, so free." "She was happy," I said firmly. "Martha chose to remember the good in people, not dwell on the bad. Even when it came to you, she didn't abandon you, Elizabeth," Sarah said, her anger cooling to sadness. "She was waiting, always waiting for you to come home." The three of us stood in the half-finished garden, surrounded by broken earth and broken promises. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, but Elizabeth shivered like she was caught in a winter storm. "I wanted to come," she said finally. "So many times I wanted to pack a bag and just run, but Charles had ways of making sure I stayed, ways of making me believe I was nothing without him." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "What kind of ways?" Elizabeth's laugh was hollow as a dried gourd. "He controlled all the money. For starters, I couldn't buy a hair ribbon without his permission. He read my mail, chose my friends, decided where I could go and when. When Martha's letters started coming, he said they were filling my head with foolish notions of independence. So you stopped reading them." I tried to, but Martha was persistent. She kept writing, even when I didn't answer. "Charles, he didn't like that. Said family ties were just chains holding us back from our true potential." Elizabeth's voice dropped to a whisper. "After a while it was easier to let him think he'd won." I thought about Martha's face whenever she mentioned Elizabeth, the way it would light up followed quickly by a shadow of sadness. She'd made excuses for her sister's silence, blamed the distance, the different lives they'd chosen. But I could see now that deep down Martha had known something was wrong. "Martha understood more than you think," I said gently. "She told me once that some cages are built with golden bars, but they're still cages." Elizabeth looked up at me with tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. "She said that? Word for word." "Said it when we were talking about her first marriage, about why it took her so long to trust me. She said love shouldn't feel like a prison sentence." Sarah had gone quiet, her anger replaced by something that looked like shame. "I'm sorry, Elizabeth. I didn't know." "How could you? I made sure no one knew. Even after Charles died I couldn't bring myself to write to Martha. What would I say? That I'd wasted 20 years being a coward." "You'd say what you're saying now," I said. "That you loved her, that you were sorry, that you wanted to make things right. But it's too late for that now." "Maybe not." I looked around the half-finished garden, thinking about Martha's dreams, about the roses she'd never get to plant. "Maybe this is how you make things right, by finishing what she started." Over the next few days the three of us worked together on Martha's garden. Sarah brought seedlings from her own garden, Elizabeth contributed bulbs she'd ordered from a catalog in San Francisco, and I provided the muscle for the heavy digging. It was awkward at first, years of misunderstanding and hurt feelings hanging between us like morning fog, but gradually as we worked side by side in the heat and dust, something shifted. Sarah began sharing stories about Martha's daily life, her struggles with the cantankerous old rooster, her pride in her vegetable garden, her dreams of expanding the ranch. Elizabeth countered with memories from their childhood, Martha teaching her to braid her hair, protecting her from their father's temper, singing lullabies during thunderstorms. She always hummed when she was happy, Elizabeth said one afternoon, carefully transplanting a rose. This little tune our mother used to sing. Do you remember it, Jack? I did remember. Martha would hum while she kneaded bread, while she mended shirts, while she brushed her hair before bed. I'd never thought to ask what the song was, content just to listen to her contentment made audible. She hummed it the morning she died, I said quietly. Even with the fever burning her up, she was humming that little tune. Elizabeth's hand stilled on the rosebush. She wasn't afraid. Martha wasn't afraid of much, Sarah said. Death least of all. She used to say dying was just another kind of traveling, and she'd never met a journey she couldn't handle. We worked until sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, the same colors as the flowers we'd planted. When we finally stood back to admire our work, the garden looked like something Martha might have dreamed, neat rows of bushes and perennials, a small stone bench positioned to catch the morning sun, a border of wild flowers that would attract butterflies. She would have loved it, Elizabeth said softly. She does love it, Sarah corrected. Martha's not really gone, you know. She's in this garden, in the house she made a home, in the memories we carry. That evening Sarah stayed for supper. Elizabeth had found Martha's recipe box, and was attempting her sister's famous apple pie, while Sarah regaled us with stories of Martha's cooking disasters, from their younger days. She once tried to impress Jack with a fancy French dish she'd read about in a ladies' magazine. Sarah spent all day on it, used half our butter allowance. When Jack took his first bite, his face went through more expressions than a traveling actor's. It wasn't that bad, I protested, though I remembered the meal in question. Martha had been so proud, so eager to please, that I'd eaten every bite and asked for seconds. What did you tell her? Elizabeth asked. That it was the most interesting meal I'd ever had, and that I loved her for making it. Elizabeth smiled, a real smile this time. That sounds like something Martha would have done, turned a disaster into an adventure. She had a gift for that, Sarah agreed. Finding the silver lining in storm clouds, making the best of whatever life handed her. As the evening wore on, I found myself really looking at these two women who had loved Martha in different ways. Sarah, steady as bedrock, who had been Martha's anchor in this community. Elizabeth, delicate as spun glass, but with a core of steel that was just beginning to show through years of suppression. What will you do now? I asked Elizabeth, as we cleaned up after supper. Will you go back to San Francisco? Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment, drying the same plate twice. I don't know. There's nothing for me there anymore. Charles left everything to his son from his first marriage, which I expected. I have enough money to live modestly, but she set down the plate and looked around Martha's kitchen. I've been thinking I might like to try something different, something that's just mine. Like what? Like staying here if you'll have me. Not permanently, she added quickly, seeing my expression, but maybe for a while. I could help around the ranch, earn my keep, and I could tend Martha's garden, keep it beautiful the way she would have wanted. Before I could answer, Sarah spoke up from the kitchen doorway. There's a teaching position opening up at the schoolhouse in town. Miss Patterson is getting married and moving to Austin. The job doesn't pay much, but it comes with a small cottage. Elizabeth's eyes wide. You think I could manage that? I've never taught before. You've got more education than most folks around here, Sarah said, and patience, judging by how you handled my temper the other day. Besides, Martha always said she would have liked to be a teacher if things had worked out differently. The idea seemed to take root in Elizabeth's mind like one of her rose cuttings. Teaching, she mused. I could teach children to read, to write, to think for themselves, to be independent, I added, understanding dawning, the way you never got to be. Elizabeth nodded, her eyes bright with possibility, the way Martha would have wanted them to be. Over the next week, Elizabeth threw herself into the idea of teaching with the same determination she'd brought to the garden. She rode into town with Sarah to meet the school board, spent hours reviewing lesson plans and children's readers, and even gave an impromptu demonstration lesson to a group of local children who were impressed by her patient manner and ability to make arithmetic seem less frightening. Meanwhile, I found myself adjusting to having someone else in Martha's space, someone who moved through the house with familiar gestures, but unfamiliar rhythms. Elizabeth was quieter than Martha had been, more careful with her words, but she had her own way of bringing life to empty rooms. She also had her own way of bringing up difficult truths. "Jack," she said, one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, "can I ask you something personal?" I nodded, though her tone made me wary. "Are you in love with Sarah McKinnon?" The question hit me like a kick from a green horse. "What? No. She's been a good friend since Martha died." "She's been more than a friend," Elizabeth said gently. "I've watched the way she looks at you, the way she's taken care of you these past months, the way you look at her when you think no one's watching." I started to protest, but Elizabeth held up a hand. "I'm not criticizing. Martha's been gone 3 months, and grief makes people lonely. Sarah's a good woman, and she clearly cares about you. But," Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully, "but I don't think you're ready to care back, not the way she deserves. You're still married to Martha's memory." Her words stung because they held truth. I had been grateful for Sarah's attention, her care, her efforts to keep me connected to the living world. But gratitude wasn't love, and friendship born of shared grief wasn't the same as the deep partnership I'd had with Martha. "Sarah knows that," I said finally. "Does she? Or is she hoping time will change things?" I thought about Sarah's face when she'd seen Elizabeth on the porch that first day, the way she'd bristled at the idea of another woman in Martha's room, her pointed references to plans and promises that linked us together. "Maybe you're right," I admitted, "but what am I supposed to do about it? Be honest, with her and with yourself. Sarah's young enough to find real love if she stops waiting for something that might never happen." The next Sunday came with the promised dinner at the Hendersons' place. Sarah arrived early to help me hitch up the wagon, her best dress pressed and her hair pinned up in a style that made her look older, more serious. "You look beautiful," I told her, and meant it. Sarah's smile faltered slightly. "Thank you. Is Elizabeth coming with us?" "She's planning on it." "What?" "Nothing. I wanted to talk to you alone for a minute before we go." We stood by the wagon in awkward silence, until Sarah found her courage. "Jack, I need to know where we stand. These past months, I've been hoping that maybe when you were ready, we might become something more than friends." Her honesty deserved honesty in return, even if it hurt. "Sarah, you've been a godsend these past months. I don't know how I would have managed without you. But I'm not ready to love anyone the way you deserve to be loved, and I'm not sure I ever will be." Sarah's face crumpled for just a moment before she gathered herself. "Is it because of Elizabeth?" "No, it's because of me, because of what I had with Martha. Some people get that kind of love once in a lifetime if they're lucky. I was lucky, and you think that's all you get? One chance at happiness? I think some chances are so perfect they don't come twice." Sarah nodded slowly, tears threatening but not falling. I don't like it, but I understand." Elizabeth appeared on the porch then, dressed in deep blue instead of her usual black. The color brought out the blue in her eyes, made her look less like a widow and more like a woman ready to rejoin the world. "Ready?" The dinner at the Hendersons was a revelation. Elizabeth charmed everyone with her stories of San Francisco society, her plans for teaching, and her obvious devotion to Martha's memory. She helped Mrs. Henderson with the serving, complimented Mr. Henderson on his prize bull, and won over the children with impromptu lessons in French phrases. But it was her interaction with Sarah that surprised me most. Instead of the tension I'd expected, the two women seemed to have reached some kind of understanding. They talked about Martha's favorite recipes, shared stories of her kindness to neighbors, and even laughed together over memories of her stubborn streak. Martha always said the secret to a good apple pie was a pinch of cinnamon and a prayer, Elizabeth told Mrs. Henderson. That's exactly what she told me, Sarah laughed, though she never could explain what kind of prayer worked best. Probably a prayer for patience, I said. Martha's crusts were legendary for being temperamental. As the evening wore on, I found myself really seeing Sarah for the first time in months, not as Martha's friend who had become my caretaker, but as the vibrant young woman she was. At 26 she had years of life ahead of her, years that shouldn't be spent waiting for a man who might never be ready to love again. The ride home was quiet. Elizabeth dozed against my shoulder, while Sarah sat straight-backed on the wagon seat beside me, her hands folded carefully in her lap. Elizabeth's right, you know, Sarah said suddenly. About what? About me waiting for something that might never happen. About deserving better than someone who's still married to a ghost. I wanted to deny it, to offer comfort, but Elizabeth's words had forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding. You do deserve better, I said quietly. Maybe, but that doesn't make wanting you any less real. We didn't speak again until I helped her down from the wagon at her place. In the moonlight she looked young and sad, and beautiful. Jack, she said, her hand lingering on mine, I need you to know that these months haven't been a burden. Taking care of you, keeping Martha's promises, being part of something that mattered to her, it's been an honor. Sarah, but Elizabeth's right, I can't keep living in Martha's shadow, hoping for scraps of affection from someone who's already given his whole heart away. She kissed my cheek gently, a goodbye kiss if I'd ever felt one. Take care of yourself, Jack Morris, and take care of Martha's sister. She needs someone to believe in her the way Martha believed in everyone. The next morning, Elizabeth and I worked in the garden without talking much. The roses were thriving, their roots taking hold in the rich soil we'd prepared. By winter they'd be established enough to survive the cold. By next spring, they'd bloom in all the colors Martha had dreamed of. Sarah's a good woman, Elizabeth said eventually. Yes, she is, but not the right woman for you. I looked up from the weeding I was doing. What makes you so sure? Elizabeth sat back on her heels considering her words. Because when you talk about Martha, your whole face changes. You light up from the inside, like you're seeing her standing right there. But when you look at Sarah, even when you're being kind, even when you're grateful, there's no light, there's just duty. Maybe that's all I have left to give. Maybe, or maybe you're just not ready to love differently instead of trying to love the same way twice. Her words stayed with me as the days passed, and Elizabeth prepared for her new role as the town's school teacher. She moved her few belongings to the cottage behind the schoolhouse, but she continued to visit the ranch daily to tend Martha's garden and share the evening meal. It was during one of these evening visits that she made an observation that changed everything. You know what I think Martha would say if she could see us now? Elizabeth asked, as we watched the sunset paint the roses in shades of gold. What? She'd say we were both being fools, missing the forest for the trees. What do you mean? Elizabeth stood and brushed dirt from her skirts, then turned to face me with the direct gaze that reminded me so much of her sister. I mean that maybe we've been so focused on honoring Martha's memory that we've forgotten to honor her wishes. Martha wanted people to be happy, Jack. She wanted love to bloom wherever it could take root. Elizabeth, let me finish. These past weeks, working together, sharing stories about Martha, building something beautiful in her memory, it's been the happiest I've been since I was 16 years old. Not because I'm trying to replace Martha, but because I'm finally becoming the person she always believed I could. The implications of her words settled over me like morning mist, soft but unmistakable. And you think Martha would approve? I asked carefully. I think Martha would say that love isn't a limited resource, that caring for her memory doesn't mean we can't care for each other, that the best way to honor what we had with her is to be open to what we might have with each other. I thought about Martha's letters to Elizabeth, full of forgiveness and invitation. I thought about her dying words, not warnings about preserving her memory unchanged, but hopes that the people she loved would find peace and happiness. It wouldn't be the same, I said. No, Elizabeth agreed. It would be different, quieter maybe, less spontaneous. We're both wounded people, Jack. We'd have to learn to love carefully, patiently. And you think that could be enough? Elizabeth smiled, and for the first time since I'd known her, the smile reached all the way to her eyes. I think Martha would say that any love built on respect and tenderness and shared purpose is enough. that any love that makes people kinder and braver, and more themselves is a gift worth accepting. As autumn painted the Texas landscape in shades of rust and gold, Elizabeth settled into her role as the town's school teacher, with remarkable success. Her pupils adored her patient manner and innovative lessons, while their parents appreciated her dedication and obvious intelligence. Meanwhile, I found myself looking forward to her daily visits, with an anticipation that had nothing to do with duty or convenience. Elizabeth brought her own brand of peace to the ranch, less exuberant than Martha's joy, but deeper somehow, like still water that reflected everything clearly. We worked together on expanding Martha's garden, adding a small greenhouse for winter vegetables, and a herb garden for the medicines Elizabeth was learning to make. We read to each other in the evenings, sharing books and ideas in a way that challenged and comforted in equal measure. And slowly, carefully, we began to build something that was ours alone. It wasn't a grand passion like the stories in dime novels. It was quieter than that, built on shared work and comfortable silences, on understanding born of mutual loss and mutual healing. It was the love of two people who had learned that happiness was not a right but a gift, not something to be demanded but something to be tended like a delicate plant. The first time I kissed Elizabeth, it was in Martha's rose garden on a crisp October morning. She had been deadheading the late blooms, humming the same tune Martha used to hum, and something about the sight of her so alive, so present, so bravely building a new life from the ashes of the old, moved me beyond words. "Is this all right?" I asked, my hands gentle on her shoulder. "Yes," she whispered, "I think Martha would say it's perfect." We were married the following spring, on the first anniversary of Martha's death, with Martha's roses blooming all around us in a riot of color and fragrance. Sarah was there, radiant in a new dress and accompanied by a young rancher from the next county who looked at her the way she deserved to be looked at. "Martha would have loved this," Sarah said as she hugged Elizabeth after the simple ceremony. "She did love it," Elizabeth replied. "She's in every flower, every blessing, every moment of happiness we allow ourselves." That evening, as Elizabeth and I sat on the porch of what was now our home, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of rose and gold, I thought about the strange journey that had brought us to this moment. I had lost the love of my life and found it again in an entirely different form. Elizabeth had lost her sister but found her way back to the family love she'd thought was gone forever. And together we had learned that honoring the dead didn't mean abandoning the living, that preserving precious memories didn't require refusing new ones. "Do you think we'll be happy?" Elizabeth asked, her head resting on my shoulder. I looked out at Martha's garden, thriving under Elizabeth's careful tending, and thought about the children Elizabeth taught, the community we'd built together, the quiet contentment that had replaced the raw grief of the past year. "I think we already are." And somewhere in the evening breeze that rustled through the roses, I could have sworn I heard the sound of gentle laughter, approving and eternal, like a blessing carried on the wind.